She was sent to study humans, but one night in his arms changed everything. Asterisk. The northern lights danced across the Alaskan sky like ribbons of green fire when the object fell from the heavens. Captain Jake Morrison was finishing his evening patrol. Around the remote weather research station, when the brilliant streak of light tore through the aurora, the impact shook the frozen ground beneath his boots and sent snow cascading from nearby pine trees. Jake had seen plenty of meteors during his 2 years stationed at this god-forsaken outpost, but nothing like this. The light hadn't burned out. As it fell, instead it had pulsed with an unnatural rhythm like a heartbeat made of starlight. His military training kicked in immediately, and he grabbed his emergency kit and snowmobile to investigate the crash site. The wreckage wasn't what he expected. Twisted metal gleamed with an iridescent sheen that seemed to shift colors in his flashlight beam. The craft was small, barely larger than a fighter jet, but its design was unlike anything in any manual he'd ever studied. Smooth curves flowed into. Impossible angles and symbols that hurt his eyes to look at directly were etched into the hull. That's when he saw her. She lay crumpled against a snowbank 20 feet from the wreckage. Her skin had a pale bluish tint that could have been from the cold, but something about it seemed natural. Her hair was the color of moonlight on water, and it seemed to move even though there was no wind. She wore a form-fitting suit made of material that looked like liquid mercury frozen in place. Jake approached cautiously. In Afghanistan, he'd learned that appearances could be deceiving and wounded enemies were often the most dangerous. But when he knelt beside her and saw her face, his breath caught in his throat. She was beautiful in a way that seemed almost painful to witness. Her features were delicate but strong, with high cheekbones and lips that were slightly fuller than human normal. Her eyes fluttered open, and Jake found himself staring into pupils that were too large and irises that shifted from deep blue to violet, like oil on water. She tried to sit up and winced, clutching her side where dark fluid seeped through her suit. "Don't move," Jake said gently. "You're hurt." She stared at him with those impossible eyes and spoke in a voice like wind chimes. The words weren't English, weren't any language he recognized, but somehow he understood the meaning. Confusion, fear, pain. "It's okay," he said, keeping his voice low and calm. "I'm going to help you." She tried to speak again, and this time the words came out in accented English. Where am I? Alaska. Earth. Jake studied her face, watching for recognition. "What's your name?" She hesitated, and he saw calculation behind her alien eyes. "Zara," she said finally. Jake nodded and carefully slipped his arms beneath her. She was lighter than she should have been, and her skin felt cool even through his gloves. When he lifted her, she didn't protest, but he felt her tense like a wild animal, deciding whether to fight or flee. "My station isn't far," he told her. "Have medical supplies there. Food. Warmth." Zara studied his face as he carried her to his snowmobile. She seemed to be cataloging every detail of his features, his expressions, his movements. It should have made him uncomfortable, but instead he found himself noting details about her too. The way her hair seemed to have its own subtle luminescence. How her breathing was deeper and slower than human normal. The fact that despite being injured and stranded, she showed no signs of panic. Back at the station, Jake set her on the medical cot in his small infirmary. As he gathered supplies, he caught her watching him with intense focus. Not the way someone watches a potential threat, but the way a scientist observes a fascinating specimen.
"Ow.
This might sting," he warned as he cleaned the wound on her side. She didn't flinch as the antiseptic foamed against her skin. The injury looked like she'd been grazed by something that had burned as well as cut. The edges of the wound had an odd metallic sheen, and the fluid seeping from it was darker than human blood. "What happened to your ship?" Jake asked as he worked Zara. Was quiet for so long, he thought she wouldn't answer. Finally she said, "Technical malfunction. I was traveling." It was obviously a lie, but Jake let it slide. He'd learned in his military days that sometimes people needed time before they could tell the truth, especially when that truth might be dangerous. As he bandaged her wound, their eyes met and held. Something passed between them in that moment. An understanding, maybe, or recognition of something neither could name. Zara's lips parted slightly, and Jake felt an unexpected pull toward her. He stepped back abruptly. Whatever was happening here, he needed to proceed carefully. This woman was clearly not entirely human, and she'd just crashed to Earth in a ship that defied physics. Getting emotionally involved would be the worst possible mistake. But as he watched her settle into the cot, her strange eyes tracking his every movement, Jake had the unsettling feeling that it might already be too late. 3 days passed in careful routine. Zara's wounds healed faster than should have been possible, and she grew stronger with each meal, though she barely touched the meat Jake offered. She preferred fruits, vegetables, and anything sweet. Manners were precise, almost ritualistic, and she studied everything about human food preparation with obvious fascination. Jake found himself looking forward to their conversations. Zara's English improved rapidly, and she asked endless questions about Earth culture. Why did humans keep photographs of dead relatives? What purpose did music serve? Why did they create art when it had no practical function? Beauty has its own purpose, Jake explained one evening as they sat by the fire. It makes life worth living. Zara tilted her head in that bird-like way she had when processing new information. Your species values things that serve no survival function. I don't. Yours. Something flickered across her face too quickly for him to read. We are more practical. Jake nodded but filed the comment away. Every conversation revealed new mysteries about her. She spoke of her people in plural, but never mentioned family or friends specifically. She knew things about Earth that no crash survivors should know, like the fact that the nearest city was Anchorage, or that this station monitored weather patterns for the national weather service. More concerning were the small impossibilities. Her body temperature ran several degrees cooler than human normal, but she never seemed cold. Her reflexes were faster than his military-trained responses. Twice he'd caught her eyes reflecting light like an animal's in the dark. Yet despite his growing suspicions, Jake found himself drawn to her. There was something magnetic about Zara, something that made him want to protect her, even as his instincts warned him she might be dangerous. She had a way of listening that made him feel like the only person in the universe. When she laughed at his stories, the sound was like silver bells, and it made his chest tight with unexpected warmth. On the 4th night, a blizzard hit the station. The wind howled like a living thing, and snow piled against the windows until they couldn't see outside. The heating system struggled against the cold, and Jake built up the fire while Zara watched from the couch. Are you warm enough? He asked, settling beside her. She nodded, but he noticed her shivering. Without thinking, he reached for the blanket and wrapped it around both their shoulders. The gesture brought them closer together, and Jake became acutely aware of her presence. She smelled like rain and ozone, with an underlying scent he couldn't identify, but that made his pulse quicken. Jake, she said softly, and when he turned to look at her, their faces were inches apart. Her eyes had darkened to deep violet, and there was something vulnerable in them, something that made his protective instincts flare. Slowly, carefully, he reached up to touch her cheek. Her skin was silk soft and cool, but it warmed under his palm. You're not like anyone I've ever met, he murmured. Nor you, she whispered. The space between them seemed to crackle with electricity. Jake felt himself leaning closer, drawn by forces he didn't understand. Zara's lips parted slightly, and her breathing quickened. For a moment the universe narrowed to just the two of them, and the promise hanging in the air between them. Then Zara pulled back sharply, breaking the spell. I should rest, she said, standing quickly. Jake watched her go, feeling like he'd been jolted awake from a dream. Something had just happened, something important, and she'd run from it.
Oh.
But not before he'd seen the hunger in her eyes that matched his own. That night, Jake lay awake, listening to the storm rage outside. Down the hall, he could hear Zara moving restlessly in her room. Twice he almost got up to check on her, but something held him back. Instinct, maybe, or the growing certainty that whatever was building between them would change everything once it was unleashed. He didn't know that in her room, Zara was fighting battles of her own. She stood at the window, staring out at the swirling snow and wrestling with emotions her people had trained her to suppress. The mission was clear: observe human behavior and report back on their weaknesses. Falling for her subject had never been part of the plan. But Jake Morrison, with his gentle hands and protective nature, His easy laughter and genuine kindness was unlike anything in the reports she'd studied. Humans were supposed to be brutal, selfish creatures driven by base instincts. They were not supposed to rescue injured strangers or share their food and shelter without expectation of reward. They were certainly not supposed to make her feel like her carefully controlled world was spinning out of orbit with nothing but a touch and a look of tender concern. Zara pressed her palm against the cold window and made a decision that would have horrified her handlers. Would tell Jake more truth than she should. Not everything, not yet, but enough to ease the guilt that was eating at her from inside. She just hoped he would still look at her the same way when he learned what she really was. The storm cleared by morning, leaving the world wrapped in pristine white silence. Jake found Zara in the kitchen attempting to make coffee with endearing incompetence. She'd figured out the basic mechanics but hadn't mastered the measurements. And the result looked like motor oil. "Here, let me help," he said, moving to stand behind her at the counter. He reached around her to adjust the coffee maker, and suddenly they were pressed together, her back against his chest. Zara went very still, and Jake could feel her heartbeat accelerating. The scent of rain and starlight filled his nostrils and made his head spin. "Better?" he asked, his voice rougher than intended. She turned in his arms, and they were face to face again, caught in that same magnetic pull from the night before. This time neither of them pulled away. Zara. Jake whispered her name like a prayer. Her hands came up to rest on his chest, and she could feel his heart hammering beneath her palms. Everything about this moment should have terrified her. She was trained to observe, not participate, to remain detached, not to lose herself in alien emotions. But Jake's eyes held such warmth, such genuine care that her defenses crumbled. "I have something to tell you," she said. "Later," Jake murmured, leaning down to brush his lips against hers. The kiss was soft, tentative, a question rather than a demand. Zara had never been kissed before. Her people didn't express affection through physical contact. But something ancient and fundamental awakened in her at the touch of Jake's lips, and she found herself kissing him back with surprising hunger. Jake's arms tightened around her, and the kiss deepened. Zara felt like she was drowning in sensations she'd never experienced before. The warmth of his mouth, the strength of his embrace, the way he held her like she was precious and fragile and powerful all at once. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. Jake rested his forehead against hers and smiled, that crooked smile that made her chest ache with unfamiliar feelings. "I've been wanting to do that since I found you in the snow," he admitted. Zara reached up to trace his jawline with her fingertips. His skin was rougher than hers, scarred from years of military service, but it fascinated her. "Your species is more complex than I expected," she said without thinking. Jake's eyes sharpened. "My species?" Zara froze, realizing what she'd said. Panic fluttered in her chest, but Jake's hands were still gentle on her waist, his expression more curious than alarmed. "Where are you really from, Zara?" She could lie again, spin another story to cover her mistake. But looking into his honest eyes, she found she didn't want to. "Not entirely. Somewhere very far away," she said finally. "Somewhere you wouldn't believe." Studied her face, taking in details he'd been trying to ignore. The too perfect symmetry of her features. The way her hair seemed to move with its own subtle current. The fact that her pupils dilated and contracted in patterns that didn't match the light. "Try me," he said. Zara single quotes as heart pounded as she made another decision that went against everything she'd been taught. She stepped back and closed her eyes, concentrating. Slowly, her human disguise began to fade. Her skin took on a subtle luminescence, and her hair brightened to true silver. When she opened her eyes, they were pure violet without visible whites. Jake sucked in a sharp breath, but he didn't step away. Instead, he reached out to touch her glowing skin with wonder. "Incredible," he whispered. "You're not afraid?" B. Zara thought about her mission, about what her people planned for Earth, and felt sick. Perhaps, but Jake just smiled and pulled her close again. "You saved my coffee maker. That makes you okay in my book." Despite everything, Zara laughed. It was such a human response, so perfectly Jake, that she felt her last defenses cracking. When he kissed her again, she let herself fall completely into the sensation of being desired for exactly what she was. They spent the day talking, really talking for the first time. Zara told him about her world, about traveling between stars, though. She was careful not to mention the true purpose of her mission. Jake shared stories of his military service, his reasons for choosing this isolated posting, the loneliness he'd been running from. As evening fell, they found themselves on the couch. Again, but this time there was no hesitation. When Jake pulled her into his arms, Zara went willingly. They kissed with the desperation of two people who knew their time together might be limited. Jake's hands tangled in her silver hair, and Zara marveled at how right this felt, how perfectly she fit against him. "Stay with me tonight," Jake whispered. Against her lips, Zara looked into his eyes and saw her own longing reflected there. Tomorrow would bring complications and impossible choices, but tonight was theirs. Yes, she breathed and let him lead her to his room, where they made love with a passion that transcended species and burned away everything except the connection between their hearts. In the aftermath, as they lay entwined in the darkness, Zara traced patterns on Jake's chest and wondered if love was always this overwhelming. She'd studied human emotions, but experiencing them was entirely different. The way her heart expanded when he smiled, the fierce protectiveness she felt when she thought of anyone hurting him, the growing certainty that she would do anything to stay in his arms forever. She just hoped forever would be long enough. 2 weeks of stolen paradise ended with the sound Zara had been dreading, the low harmonic hum that could only come from Velaran engines approaching through Earth's atmosphere. She sat up in bed, her enhanced hearing picking up the frequency. Long before Jake's human ears could detect it. "What is it?" Jake asked, sleepily reaching for her. Zara's single quotes, as she looked at him, tousled hair and trusting eyes still soft with sleep and love. In a few hours, maybe less, everything would change. Her people would expect her to complete the mission she'd been abandoning piece by piece every day she spent in Jake's arms. "My people," she whispered. "They're coming." Jake was instantly alert, sitting up and pulling her against his side. "Is that bad?" Zara thought about Commander Thorne's cold, calculating mind about the weapons. Her ship carried about the reports she was supposed to have been sending about human weaknesses and vulnerabilities. She'd sent nothing but routine status updates claiming she needed more time to complete her observations. "It could be," she said carefully. Jake tilted her chin up to look at him. "Zara, what aren't you telling me?" The harmonic hum grew louder, and Zara knew she was out of time. Everything she'd been avoiding, every truth she'd been too cowardly to face, was about to crash down around them. "I wasn't traveling when my ship crashed," she said in a rush. "I was sent here to study humans, study us how." Zara couldn't meet his eyes, to find weaknesses, ways to defeat you. The silence stretched between them, heavy with betrayal and broken trust. When Jake finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "Defeat us for what purpose?" "Conquest," Zara whispered. "My people need new resources, new worlds. Earth has what we require." Jake stood abruptly and walked to the window. Outside, the first light of dawn was breaking over the snow-covered landscape. Zara could see the tension in his shoulders the way. His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. "So everything between us," he said without turning around. "Was it part of the mission?" "No." Zara's voice broke on the word. "Jake, no. What we have is real. It's the most real thing I've ever felt. You were still planning to help them destroy my world. I was supposed to, but I can't. I won't." Zara stood and moved toward him. "Being with you changed everything. Showed me that humans aren't what we believed. You're capable of such kindness, such love." Jake turned to face her, and she saw the pain in his eyes. "How many of my people will die when they come?" "I don't know," Zara admitted. "Millions. Maybe more." The harmonic hum was clearly audible now, and through the window they could see lights descending from the dawn sky. 3 ships, sleek and deadly, moving with purpose toward the research station. "They're here," Zara said unnecessarily. Jake grabbed his rifle from the closet, and Zara's heart clenched. "That won't help," she said gently. "Maybe not, but I won't go down without a fight." His fierce determination, even in the face of impossible odds, reminded Zara why she'd fallen in love with him. Humans didn't surrender, even when logic dictated they should. They fought for what they believed in, no matter the cost. "There might be another way," Zara said suddenly. "If I can convince Commander Thorne that humans aren't suitable for conquest, that the cost would be too high. And if you can't—" Zara looked at the man she loved more than her own life and made her choice. "Then I'll fight beside you." The ships landed in the clearing outside the station with barely a whisper of sound. Through the window, Jake and Zara watched armed figures in environmental suits emerge from the vessels. They moved with military precision, surrounding the building with practiced efficiency. "Stay behind me," Jake said, moving toward the door. "Jake, wait." Zara caught his arm. "Before they come in, there's something else you need to know." He looked at her expectantly. "I love you," she said simply. "Whatever happens, I need you to know that you changed me, made me understand what it means to truly live instead of just existing." Jake's expression softened, and he cupped her face in his hands. "I love you too, more than I thought possible." They kissed desperately, passionately, as if they could pour all their unspoken words into that single moment of connection. When they broke apart, the front door was already opening. Commander Thorne entered first, tall and imposing in his form-fitting armor. His features were sharp and coldly beautiful in the way of their people. Behind him came two soldiers, weapons drawn, but not yet aimed. "Observer Zara," Thorne said in their musical language. "You've missed your scheduled reports," Commander Zara replied, stepping protectively in front of Jake. "I required additional time for my observations." Thorne's pale eyes flicked too. Jake with obvious disdain. "And what have you observed about this specimen?" Zara felt Jake tense behind her at being called a specimen, but his military training held, and he remained silent. "Humans are more resilient than our intelligence suggested," Zara said carefully. "They adapt quickly to threats and show remarkable loyalty to their companions." "Irrelevant," Thorne dismissed. "Have you identified their primary weaknesses?" This was it? It's the moment Zara had to choose between the world she'd known her entire life and the love that had transformed her understanding of what life could be. "Yes," she said, lifting her chin. "Their greatest weakness is also their greatest strength. They love too much to ever surrender." Thorne's eyes narrowed. "Explain." "Any attempt at conquest will result in prolonged, costly resistance. They will fight for their families, their homes, their freedom, until every last one is dead. The resources required to subdue them would exceed any possible gain." "You're recommending we abort the mission?" Zara felt Jake's hand touch her back. A silent gesture of support and solidarity. "I'm recommending we find another way. It's one that doesn't involve the unnecessary destruction of either of our peoples." Thorne studied her for a long moment, and Zara held her breath, wondering if he could see through her deception to the truth beneath, that she wasn't trying to save resources or avoid casualties. She was trying to save the man she loved and the world that had taught her heart how to sing. Commander Thorne's expression remained unreadable as he processed Zara's words. The two soldiers behind him shifted slightly, weapons still at ready, but not yet hostile. The tension in the small room was thick enough to cut. "You've grown attached to this human," Thorne observed, his voice carrying disapproval. "I've learned from him," Zara corrected, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "Ass was required for the mission." "And what exactly have you learned?" Jake stepped forward, despite Zara's attempt to keep him behind her. "That your intel was wrong," he said, addressing Thorne directly. "Humans aren't the primitive, brutal species you expected, are we?" Thorne's cold eyes fixed on Jake with the kind of attention a predator gives potential prey. "You speak our language," Zara taught me, Jake replied steadily. "Just like she learned about human kindness and resilience, and the fact that we're stronger together than apart." "Interesting," Thorne mused. "And you believe this changes the fundamental equation of conquest?" "I believe it should," Jake said. "But more than that, I believe Zara's right about the cost. You want resources? Trade for them. You want territory? There are uninhabited worlds that wouldn't fight back. You want to avoid a war that would cost both our peoples everything? Listen to what she's telling you. And one of the soldiers spoke up. In rapid Valerian and Zara's blood chilled. He detected human military transmissions. Reinforcements were already mobilizing, though they were still hours away. It seems your people are already preparing to resist, Thorn said to Jake. Perhaps. We should test these theories about human resilience firsthand. No, Zara said sharply. Commander, you gave me this mission because you trusted my judgment. I'm telling you conquest isn't viable, and I'm beginning to suspect your judgment has been compromised by emotional attachment. Thorn replied coldly. The accusation hung in the air like a death sentence. Emotional compromise was considered a severe flaw among Zara's people grounds for reassignment or worse. But looking at Jake standing tall and defiant despite facing impossible odds, Zara found she didn't care. You're right, she said simply. It has been compromised. This human taught me what my people forgot long ago. That connection makes us stronger, not weaker. That love is worth fighting for. Thorn's hand moved to his weapon. Then you've forgotten your duty to your own species. Have I? Zara stepped forward, her own latent abilities beginning to surface. Her skin took on a brighter luminescence, and the air around her seemed to shimmer. Or have I remembered what we're supposed to be protecting? What's the point of survival if we lose everything that makes existence worthwhile? Idealistic nonsense, Thorn snarled. But Zara caught uncertainty in his voice. That's when Jake surprised them all by laughing. Not the bitter laugh of despair, but genuine amusement. You know what's funny? He said. You came here expecting to find weaknesses, and instead, you found the one thing that makes us impossible to defeat. Not our technology or our weapons, but our ability to inspire others to be better than they thought they could be. He looked at Zara with such pride and love that her heart soared. She didn't fail her mission, Commander. She succeeded beyond your wildest expectations. She found the truth about humanity, and that truth is going to save both our worlds. How do you figure that? Thorn demanded. Jake grinned, that crooked smile that had first captured Zara's heart. Because now you have to. Ask yourself a question. If one of your best observers could fall in love with a human, what does that say about the rest of your people? How many others might choose connection over conquest if given the chance? Zara saw the moment when Thorn began to doubt. It was subtle, just a slight widening of his eyes, but she caught it. Jake's words had found their mark. There's another way, Zara pressed, taking advantage of Thorn's hesitation. Cultural exchange instead of conquest. Shared knowledge instead of subjugation. We could learn from each other, become stronger together instead of destroying what we don't understand. The Council will never approve such a plan, Thorn said, but his weapon remained holstered. Then we'll have to convince them, Zara replied. All of us together. The next few hours passed in tense negotiation. More ships arrived, both human and Valerian, as word of first contact spread through both civilizations. But something miraculous happened in that remote Alaskan research station. Instead of shots fired, there were words exchanged. Instead of invasion, there was invitation. It wasn't easy. There were those on both sides who wanted conflict, who believed strength could only come through domination. But Zara and Jake stood together as living proof that another way was possible. Their love became a bridge between worlds, a symbol of what could be achieved when people chose understanding over fear. Months later, as the first joint human-Valerian research facility was being constructed, Zara stood in Jake's arms, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. Any regrets? Jake asked softly. Zara thought about the life she'd left behind, the certainties she'd abandoned for the beautiful uncertainty of love and growth and change. Only one, she said, leaning into his warmth. What's that? That it took a mission to study you for me to find you, she smiled. I should have fallen to earth much sooner. Jake laughed and spun her around, the sound echoing across the landscape where two species were learning to build something new together, something better than either could have created alone. Love had conquered after all, just not in the way anyone had expected, and in a small research station where it all began, two hearts continued to beat imperfect. Harmony proved that some things truly are universal.